Good evening, all. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. My name's Joss Brownlee. I'm the chair for the Cibse West Midlands Region Committee, and it's great to see so many people attending this event, and it's great to have you with us, so thank you very much. We're here today to reflect on the use of the new approved Document O building regulation for England, now that the regulation has been applicable to all new building regulations applications since June 2022. As a reminder, approved Document O Overheating applies to all new building, residential development, care homes and student accommodation. The regulation requires the development of an overheating strategy demanding input from specialists. We're here today to understand what impact that's had from people directly involved in the application of ADO. Providing expert opinion in the assessment of overheating, we have Susie Diamond and James Healey. Good evening, both.
Good evening.
Susie co-founded Inkling, a building physics consultancy, in 2011. Her core skills are in using dynamic thermal simulation tools to predict the operational energy and the thermal performance of buildings. She deploys these skills creatively and intelligently to enable more informed design decisions and better buildings. Susie has become an expert in the field of predicting overheating in homes. She was a lead author on Cibse's TM59 design methodology for the assessment of overheating risk in homes, which is now referenced in ADO. The one-page early design stage GHA tool published in 2019 and supported the more recent retrofit version. She is a lead author in the imminent Future Homes Hub Compliance Guide for approved Document O, and is also working with other authors on proposals for an update to TM59, for which research is currently being undertaken by Loughborough University. She regularly speaks and writes blogs and articles on the topic of assessing and mitigating overheating risk. James Healey is a director of the new company UK Overheating, the UK's first company dedicated to the assessment of overheating for residential development, and he's an industry specialist in acoustics, ventilation and overheating. James is the principal author of the Acoustics, Ventilation and Overheating Guide, which is now referenced in approved Document O. James is also part of the same group of principal authors who drafted the industry guidance on how to produce assessments compliant with the regulation, and has contributed to the previously mentioned Future Homes Hub Compliance Guide for approved Document O. Providing the perspective of a ventilation cooling supplier, we have Richard Paine. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening.
Richard has been working in sales and marketing roles within the construction industry for the last 19 years, which has given him comprehensive knowledge on the supply chain and its intricacies. He's been involved directly in marketing, product management, sales and product development of commercial, industrial, fire safety systems and HVAC products, including heat pumps, heat recovery units, electric heating, underfloor heating and window vents across the European market. Having gained some valuable skills and experience during his time at Honeywell and Dakin, he has now returned to the HVAC market to leverage his knowledge and experience across all Volution ventilation brands. And providing the perspective of a developer, we have Sam Potter. Sam, good evening. Sam is the design director at Reef Group and architecture director at Urban R. Reef's in-house design studio. He has led the design of some of Reef's most prestigious schemes, including Cavendish Square in London. He oversees the design and management of a broad spectrum of complex mixed-use projects that deliver transformational impact in a number of UK cities within the healthcare, hospitality, workplace, retail and placemaking sectors. Sam is an architect with a passion for environmental performance and the creation of an innovative public spaces. So, to get things started, Susie, how's the last 6 months been working with the regulation?
There's a question. So the last 6 months, so since they come into force, effectively, I think the key thing is I've answered a lot of questions. Everyone's asking questions. I think in the intro you gave to me, we were talking about the Future Homes Hub guidance that actually came out in the autumn or September time. and has been, I think, quite well received. It's quite a detailed, sort of thorough exploration of the ADO and how to go about complying with it. But we do still get a lot of questions. I think a lot of people are trying to get their heads around quite how it all works and the minutiae, because although it looks, you know, at first glance like a fairly simple check, the more you dig into it, the more confused you get, and a lot of key themes have emerged. So I've written 4 blogs for our Inkling website now, and all of them have attracted quite a lot of attention for our tiny company. We've had something, I was looking today, 1,400 views of each of the blogs. So not just, so it's about 5,000 for the first one, but it's 1,400 for the one I put up in November, which was looking at some of the issues that we were exploring over the last couple of months to do with actually understanding from a modeler's point of view how best to model the window openings, how to determine the free area or equivalent area, or again, the terminology used is really confusing. So we spent a bit of time trying to unpick that and understand the relationship with acoustic openings, so that we made sure that that discussion between what acousticians are assuming in terms of openable area matches what the modelers, the thermal modelers, are putting into their models, so that we're not at cross purposes. Even that is quite complicated, and within that, you know, calculating those open areas, we're looking at how to make sure you include the maximum reach on the safety side of things. So there's a 650 from the inside face of the wall maximum reach. That's not the easiest thing to factor into those calculations to measure the window openings, and even then it still doesn't take into account things like, you know, quite tight reveals that could reduce the free area quite a lot. Potentially, if you've got quite deep reveals and your window only opens a limited amount, that often compromises the free area, but that isn't factored into those sort of calculations. We probably should be in some way. So there's a lot of detail and a lot of finicky stuff that we're still trying to unpick and still, you know, looking for clarifications from at times. So I think that's been my last 6 months, is a lot of fiddly detail and trying to answer questions for people. But it's not my regulation, I didn't write it, and somehow I kind of get I think people assume that we did, or somehow we're intimately connected. Yeah, we weren't. We're just doing our best to help explain it to everybody.
Is the correct term cheeks for the side parts of the window that are exposed to the wind? That's a term that I've used in the past to, you know, whether the it's that side section of the window rather than the bottom, you know, the big envelope sort of section. But yeah, as you're saying, the specific details and the exact positioning of the window pane in the reveal of the wall is quite important in working out its effectiveness and how the room or the building responds. So yeah, all really interesting stuff, which hopefully we'll get into a bit more detail over the course of the next half an hour to an hour. But James, what problems have you encountered in overheating assessments since June?
Well, like Susie, things have been very busy. I think, and also like Susie said, people have, you know, I've been trying to explain the regulation. People have made the assumption that I was directly involved in writing it, or have some responsibility, and all I've been, because I was the lead author on the our acoustics industry guidance on how to understand and how to comply with it with Part O. People have assumed that well, some people have assumed that we could redraft what the requirements are, and we obviously can't. And some people have assumed that I'm setting those requirements, which we're not. We're just responding to what the regulation says, and using our knowledge to actually interpret what it says to clarify for people. So that's been, and I continue to help people understand what it actually says. I think there's still huge confusion or huge challenge in that exercise of just making people aware of what it actually is as a regulation. I mean, just today I had a building control body who were asking for an overheating assessment in a converted dwelling, for example, because they hadn't got the regulation correct. And that's just one element. you know, where you see sort of misinterpretations or you know, this is a new thing, it's a very complex thing, and that I guess the 6 months as a lot of other things that I've experienced, but yeah, that's been the major thing, is actually trying to explain to people about what actually the regulation says, and I still think that right now there are across the whole industry there are some big misunderstandings, I feel anyway, and I think it's going to be a challenge going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's one thing the document stipulating what's required, but it's another thing putting it into practice, and then another thing with people living with it as well. But Sam, what's your experience of how competitors are doing in response to this regulation?
Well, ourselves and our competitors we work in quite an agile industry, and a lot of people think developers are stuck in their ways. In fact, they tend to drive things, and we embrace change. And actually, the Part O change is just one of multiple parameters which have changed in the last 6 months. And that's not just the regulatory environment. The thing that's hit us most is actually, unfortunately, our government's actions, and the bond markets have gone into free fall. Cost of construction driven by various political forces has gone through the roof, and many of our competitors mothballing schemes. Unfortunately, these kind of regulatory changes, which are not transitional but hard stops, are causing failures in projects to be progressed as a kind of cumulative result. Now, when we're all feeling optimistic in the development world, we're going, well, these were well intentioned. The idea is to improve the environment, save energy, but they were ill thought through in terms of their cumulative effect, whether it's the new Part L combined with the new Part O, combined with really crap air in cities and very noisy environments. And the knock-on effect is to drive up energy demand, to lead to housing which is less energy efficient, and to create homes which are less pleasant to live in because you're in conflict with providing daylight at a time when we're also being expected as developers to deliver buildings with higher daylight performance, which has also changed in the last 3 months. So delivering housing, student accommodation, even hotels has become incredibly challenging without actually leading to sealed buildings with high performance cooling and heating solutions to control the environment to meet the requirement. So unfortunately, what we're seeing amongst our competitors at the moment is that things are going the wrong direction as a result of the regulatory environmental changes and making worse buildings. Now, I think that's temporary, but I think there is a misunderstanding from those who perhaps put together the regulation and those who have to work with land values and delivery of viable schemes. Where we're going to have to get to is much better passive design, much lower densities in cities that have more space around them, is the simplest way of looking at it. But market forces are driving the other direction. So we're kind of stalled. So that's where our competitors and ourselves are getting to. And sadly, what that means is that a lot of the money there's an exodus from residential at exactly the time when you need an influx. And the money, particularly in funds that would previously look to finance build to rent schemes, etc., they are looking to other sectors where the potential for margins is greater. So the sad truth is it's pretty bleak. Those of us working on projects are kind of making sure that we kind of do our best with it. But I think what we need to see is leniency from the authoritative bodies and a transitional phase of how this can come in. Otherwise, you're going to see complete stalling in the development market as a result of other forces having impact on it. So sorry, that's a really long-winded answer of saying it's going to take quite a long time. We will get there, we always do. But
Not a
I
problem.
hope that various authorities and building control officers, etc., show leniency in the next 6 to 18 months. Otherwise, we can have some big problems with delivery.
Yeah, there's that eternal difficulty with the triangle of cost, quality, and time, and you can pick two. You can never have all three. So yeah, you can have a comfortable or a usable space, but it comes at a cost, whether that's capital expenditure or operational expenditure or health and well-being expenditure. Then there is a cost to it. Sam.
Can I add to that, Josh? That I think obviously in the house building industry, that is their business. It's not there's no diversification to other sectors, and it's an incredible challenge. And because as Sam was talking about the other regulations, I mean, the biggest thing I've seen from a developer perspective in terms of change is actually the fire regulations, and I'll go with that. And actually that in the projects that I've been working on or been involved in bidding for, that's taken precedence over everything else, really. Priority over everything else is getting the fire consultant and fire regulations in place, and it's so complex. And then when you throw in all these other things, it is a real challenge. But for the house building industry, because of these, they've got this is their business. They've got to change, and they've got to just carry on building as much as they can. I think the reaction has been they're trying to implement the change, but there's such a big change. It's been very difficult for them to do it all at once. So as Sam said, that they're having to do this change, but trying to do it in a measured way.
James, I think there's one key point perhaps to add to that is geography.
Yeah.
The urban sites are hammered.
Yeah.
We work in city centre and in what I'll call provincial cities with more space, lower land values, much better. And Part O is easily accommodated, as are pretty much everything else in cities which are looking to regenerate, which have suffered for decades with underdevelopment. But pretty much anywhere inside the M25 and most city centres, it's stalling development dramatically. The regulatory environment is so constrained that a number of our competitors, not us, are leaving those town centre areas. They're kind of saying they've had it. They're no longer developable. We have to go elsewhere. So mass house builders are some of those, because it's just simply not worth it for them. So there needs to be a meeting of minds between the regulatory bodies and the teams that actually have to put their money into delivering these things, and where their margins come from delivery, because it's challenging, but it's all well intended. It's all the right thing to do. We need a transitional period, just like we do with energy.
Yeah, one of the comments I just heard was, stop building on top of each other. So there's a train of thought that, that the concentration of people in city centres is a totally different sort of approach to outside of city centres. But by having a tall, high-rise building, you have that luxury of, well, I say luxury, but you have the benefit of separation on the top floors, compared to those down at ground and first floor level, with exhaust gases and fumes and monoxide and various other nasties in the air. But if we don't have that concentration of people, then we've got to start taking up land, and land comes at a premium, and on and on and on. But Richard, what for you works and what doesn't work?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really tough question. I think everybody on the panel has already said it before. I've noted a few comments down. I'd like to, on Sam's point about being agile in the development world. Absolutely. There's no one single design that you can just roll out and plonk out in the same in the same way over and over again. You know, we've talked about, you know, like market segmentation, geographical segmentation, height segmentation, density segmentation, all these kind of things, and I think it provides a challenge to everybody, because actually you do need to take an agile approach, and there isn't a one solution that fits every type of application that's out there. I think so. You know, what doesn't work is one solution. There isn't one. What does work is taking every project as it comes and looking at the individual requirements of it. I think there is some to talk further about what James said. You know, there is some confusion, and there's lots of challenges, and there are some conflicts in what we're doing in the buildings today. Ventilation rates have increased in the last round of the building regulations in Part F, but not to any extent that's going to impact overheating in the summer. And what we're seeing is the provision of ventilation equipment that's in there, even centralized systems, is not large enough to deal with the overheating that's in some of these properties, particularly when you start looking at restrictions in window openings, and replacement air then becomes a problem, and you have to add additional equipment into those environments. It soon becomes quite a burden. You know, people are asking questions about putting, you know, bathroom fans into bedrooms, for example, you know, to get that kind of level of flow rates that's required. And it's odd seeing a bathroom fan being fitted into a habitable room, as particularly with noise issues that are going on there as well. So I think that everyone's struggling to find the solution without moving to you know, dare I say, aggressive active systems that are using energy to Sam, to your point, which is we're supposed to be delivering net zero carbon buildings, not producing buildings that ultimately need more equipment, more electrically driven plant that goes into it to provide a habitable environment in the summer. So I think, you know, what I'm not sure I've got the answer for everybody. I'm not so, but yeah, James, I know you've done a lot of work on this. We've spoken about it as well.
We have. I think one of the biggest problems with this is that people are defaulting to mechanical systems. As you've seen, you've had a big increase in demand for mechanical systems in the last 6 months. People are defaulting to that because they don't want to apply the good measures to reduce heat gains, to reduce the demand on the system. So that if you apply this regulation in the way that I believe it should be applied, you make every attempt to reduce the heat gains first, and then only when you've exhausted all those measures, you then rely on other systems to remove the excess heat. And if you can do that passively without mechanical systems, great. If you can't, then you revert to a mechanical system, for example. But people are not embracing the changes, and I understand that, because it's a huge change in the appearance of buildings when you're talking about things like brise soleil or vertical fins, things that with shade, depending on the orientation, shade windows. They're huge changes. But people don't. That's not a product that people are used to viewing or buying as a homeowner. So until you can convince people that buy houses that this is actually something that is needed and is desirable, housing developers are going to try and move away from it, because it changes the aesthetics of their product significantly. And then you'll get solutions which aren't reducing solar gain as much as they should be, placing more demand on mechanical systems. So I think that's one of the things that is not working at the moment.
There's some interesting things, some developers that I've been speaking to who kind of said, you know, the regulations are falling from height regulation, you know, about openable windows at height, which means you have to put bars across it. And the developers said, we're not putting bars over windows. You know, that's an absolute no-no. We're not doing that. We're going to put cooling in, because I can't sell a house with bars over the windows, but I can sell one with cooling in it, and that's where all the conflicting regulations come together to say, actually, you know, it forces people down kind of a logical decision tree, if you like, given what they've got around them in that agile framework, because of a number of factors in terms of consumer wants and desires and needs, and perceptions and things. So I think we are all being driven in I guess an unintended consequential way into solutions that perhaps we've got to try and think a little bit differently about the construction in the product, in the product, which I mean the house. So
yeah, and there's sorry, James, go on.
I was just going to say the other thing which I've experienced, and I don't know, I'm going technical now. We're in a Cibse forum, so I'm going to delve technical. I'm in trouble then. One of the things that I've seen that people aren't properly grasping actually is that when you've got background ventilation, you rely on air movement around the property as a sort of natural movement, and there are standard allowances in buildings for door undercuts and things that allow background air to move around. And then when you're talking about background ventilation, it's in terms of supply and extract, you've got that general movement around that property within the air permeability envelope, as it were. But when you're talking about overheating, maybe Susie is the expert in this far more than me, but when you're talking about overheating, you're talking about air exchanges. We're talking about actual movement of air from one space to another. What I often see is so the standard background ventilation system supplies air to bedrooms and living rooms, for example, and extracts air from the wet rooms, the kitchens and the bathrooms. If you apply that to a removal of excess heat approach, you're wholly reliant on that air transferring from that one space, that the bedroom or living room, to the space that is having the extract, for example, like the kitchen or the bathroom. You're relying on a lot of air movement between those spaces to match the calculation that is embedded in the dynamic modelling when we talk about air exchanges. And I think we're getting systems or specifications coming through which say this much duty for this room, when actually but then in systems being installed which don't properly respond to that air exchange factor. So I think that's one of the things that I think is maybe a ticking time bomb, when you realise that you're asking a lot of air to move what's effectively under a 10 mil door undercut sometimes. I think that you need a different approach for when you're talking about the type of air movement that we are looking at for removal of excess heat.
Well, absolutely, the ventilation rates set by ventilation equipment in the building regulations are not there for overheating. They're there for the provision of adequate indoor air quality, and it's based on floor area. And the pressure differentials that you're talking about, James, are measured and they're very, very low. They're like 1 pascal. You know, that kind of pressure. And you know, we're in a position where we're being asked to put in and kind of sign off, like we're gonna put in this inline fan in the ceiling void. We're gonna have a button in the room, and when it overheats, we're gonna press it. Will the window vent deal with that? Is it large enough to take in that amount of air? Well, it's not. You know, the ventilation equipment and the window vents are sized for adequate provision of indoor air quality through very low ventilation rates. They're not designed for huge volumes of air that you need to move, like 10 times the volumes of air that you need to move in terms of getting rid of that heat out of the property. And you just introduce noise, you strangle you stall the unit out. Exactly. So you know without being able to open the windows and getting in that much larger free area across the window, it's really problematic. And they're the same properties that you can't open the windows because of either security, the height, or other environmental reasons. So you know, back to my original comment, what works and what doesn't, it depends, because if you can open the window and put a fan in, then you're fine. You've got this huge volume of air that's blowing through. If you have to keep those shut, then absolutely you've got a problem with the makeup air as well. So, and these are all of the battles that we're fighting against in the to find solutions in these places.
And that's even without talking about purge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll talk about product a little bit later on, but we've had an acoustic purge ventilator in the range for a long time. It's a large, low energy consuming product that moves a huge volume of air when you need it to, and it's quiet. But that's in addition to the rest of the ventilation systems that are already in there. So it's additional cost. It's additional energy consumption, and that's allowed underneath the kind of the desirable mechanical ventilation solutions without active cooling. So, there are solutions out there, and some we are providing solutions for people, but it is varied depending on location, geography, type of application, density, all of those things. Everything is quite unique. And to Sam's point, which I really liked, is actually, I think developers are very good at solving problems in an agile way, because no one development is the same as another.
And it's where engineers need to step up and do some good design work to establish what the best solution is for the location and the home and the design and the acoustic levels. I think the problem, I think in a lot of minds it does. I think we're going through a phase where people are panicking a little bit. And I think when you boil it down to the fact that we're talking about bedroom windows staying closed at night only, it's not all windows ever being closed all the time. So it does limit the problem down to a smaller problem. It's still quite difficult to solve in a lot of locations, and I'm not undermining that challenge, but I think there are engineering solutions. They are potentially more expensive than we're used to. They're potentially not solutions that we've normally put into homes, but they do exist. So I think there'll be a phase where we kind of figure that out, and new products are sort of developed that are more focused on homes, and solutions start to come packaged up that will work.
And dare I say it, Susie, that's when the expert comes in to try and accurately identify where exactly that's needed and pinpoint it to reduce cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some really good points just been raised about, the modelling can help you understand what kind of air change rate you need in order to mitigate the overheating risk. But the modelling won't tell you if your system isn't designed very well and won't actually work in practice, or, the undercuts of your door or your trickle vents aren't big enough. The model will just, let you do pretty much what you want. What it will tell you is, the sizing kind of information that you need and where that past mark is for that.
I think there's a disconnect at the moment between what someone's spitting out as a result and what someone's installing based on that result, and there's a disconnect really, and that's I think where I would like to see it closed, the gap closed.
We've introduced yet another performance gap. Yes. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
I think there's some great comments in the chat. I just that follow on from what you're saying, which I briefly refer to. I think Adam Selvey is commenting on the comfort and choice, and that's something which we see in our well, of course we have regulation, but we're seeing slightly absurd things where certainly at Reef we're designing buildings now, both as architect and developer, where we're designing to meet the regulation, and then we're designing for when those regulations no longer are relied upon. So we're designing sealed offices at the moment with opening windows. We can't open the windows because they won't comply given the external environment, but we've got the opening windows for two reasons. One, that we believe the environment will improve to a point where we can still be regulatory compliant. And the second is we've got tenants who won't pay for the energy, and they'll open the windows even if it doesn't comply, because they're not going to take the lease for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, if they have to pay for the energy. And the simple answer to that is this point on comfort. They know their staff in an office, for instance, will accept opening a window, a bit of noise while they're working, to have cooling and be not compliant. But it doesn't comply with what the building is designed to, but we are designing beyond those regulations to allow for what we know the end user will want to do, and for a rising cost of energy market. And we're doing exactly the same thing in student schemes. We're designing buildings with openable vents, where we're being told we can't open the windows because we don't want an asset that we can own and operate for the next 50 years, where we can't open the windows and get students who will come in who can afford to be there because they can't afford to pay the energy. No one can, and they'll accept a bit of noise at night to have the heat go out on a summer's night at night time. So it's
a good point
really
about choice
hard.
though, because there's nothing in ADO that requires you to seal windows. In fact, quite the opposite. They're suggesting that windows are openable as much as possible. The point is that if it's too noisy with the windows open, occupants should have a choice to keep them closed and be quiet and not overheat. And that's what they're trying to achieve. Now, I admit that's difficult and that's not always, you know, that the choice at some points is close your windows and pay a high energy bill, or open your windows and tolerate the noise. But that's
Susie, you're right. But we're also finding various bodies, including fairly vociferous air quality officers, who are actually saying, no, you can't have opening windows because you'll poison people. So we're actually being told, no, we are saying, we don't care. We are applying for opening windows. Throw us out of committee if you want. And it is,
no, it's not coming from ADO though. You know, we're talking about ADO, and ADO says we open your windows wide is what ADO says, as much as possible.
I know it does, but
remove restrictors, take them all off, open your windows wide. So
and this is where the conflict comes, and the comfort point. You're right, but this is why we need everybody to come along with it, including various officers in their little towers who need to get out of them.
I think that's going to be one of the issues. Is interpretation is left a lot to building control, and they're going to differ.
They do because they don't have the skill set, unfortunately, yet. It's my view that they shouldn't need it, and actually that there should be a professional scheme that people complete, and that's it, and so you remove that need for them to have that skill set. But at the moment that we're reliant on them to say yay or nay. But one thing I should say is ADO does point to Part F for air quality limits. And the air quality limits are the legal limits at the moment, and there's a reason why they're there, is that so that we're not opening windows and exposing people that they wouldn't otherwise wouldn't know that they're exposed to poor air quality, because you can't see air quality, poor air quality. So there is a limitation in that you for Part F you shouldn't allow openings that would onto areas that would allow poor air quality inside the home, and so there is that issue. And as Sam said, most local authorities, if there's a air quality issue, they won't allow the window to be openable because of that. The person would say because the people can't see the poor air quality. So it is placing a demand on closing windows completely, even though from an acoustic perspective we would always say leave it to occupant choice, provide the provision so that it's safe and it's comfortable for somebody, but leave them to the choice of whether they actually open the window or not. That's what we'd normally say in our industry.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and one of the other comments that I've just been talking about is the likes of thermal mass of the building and the wall thicknesses, because in all the historic buildings and churches and other examples, we don't seem to have an overheating issue. And then, maybe something with a large cold water storage tank or a heat sink of some sort, using that thermal mass is potentially a solution which will deal with the problem at source, rather than having to deal with the effects of the problem within the room. But Sam, do you think we're going to see any changes to the architecture of big buildings significantly in the future?
Yes, partly to do with this. But I mean, where it's driving the concept schemes we're working on is positively is a hell of a lot more interest in passive design. There's a lot more interest in orientation, the envelope itself, the efficiency and scale of the envelope. We internally are designing more like that. The external teams we employ, we are encouraging and pushing on that basis. And the truth is money talks, and a lot of that is driven by keeping the energy bills down to make the future buildings competitive with current tenant options in high energy consuming buildings which drive high bills. And the best way to do that is obviously understand your site, understand the constraints, and work the passive design. And I think we're going to see a lot more passively designed buildings, and a lot more emphasis on orientation, efficiency of the proportion of envelope to footprint, etc. Whether that's housing or otherwise, because we simply can't get into things like acoustic vents because they're just not affordable. They're too space hungry. We can't afford to build those anymore. We can't afford to build cooling systems. We can in the short term, but that's just not going to be possible in a couple of years, because you're going to end up driving residential build costs past the £250 a square foot mark, and that just means we won't build anything. We're already creaking on schemes like that, and unless there is a massive correction in land values, that isn't going to happen. So passive design is the one way open to all parties, which will start to reduce the dependency on technologies, whether it's MEP systems, advanced technological windows and venting systems. So all the focus we have is on that, because that's the only way that we'll actually hit square foot prices, which mean we can deliver schemes, which is a conundrum, because gone are the days of cheap debt for housing associations, councils, etc., who were dependent on government bonds, which no longer exist post September of this year. So I think we're going to see the market forces driving passive design in a big way, and the buildings will look very different as a result.
Good.
And James, do you think that's a similar in UK, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and maybe even the rest of Northern Europe as well?
Well, Northern Europe, in terms of building architecture, Northern Europe have been far better at adapting to these things than we are. We're the only country that I'm aware of, I don't know if Susie knows, but we're the only country that, or only group of countries that are actually now regulating overheating. I'm not aware of any other country out in Europe, for example, that has a strict building code on it, but I think bespoke developers like Reef Group that Sam works for, that they do embrace it, and they're able to adopt these features in what they design, and appeal to people that want to live in these spaces. But I think for the housing market in general, I think it's still a real challenge for people to adopt them. But I think where there's differences, I mean, there are differences in the regulation if you go for different parts of the country, which is again another challenge for somebody. If you're say a national house builder and you're trying to work across the whole country, you've got a different set of rules in Wales, a different set of rules in Scotland. For example, in Wales, you can, as long as you've got a cross ventilation in your property, in your dwelling, and you're not constrained by opening your window, so you can still open your window to get purge ventilation according to Part F, taking account of the fact of noise or air quality. If you can do that, then you don't need a strategy at all. You don't need to do any modelling or anything. That is, a given. Is as long as you can open the windows, okay, which is different to England, and it's in Scotland. Although it's not released yet, the draft guidance applies both to new build and refurbished dwellings, which is again another challenge in itself. So yeah, there's a whole different set of requirements, and that will lead to different responses for designs, and creates more complication again for the national housing industry. I personally, I would prefer to see one set of rules everywhere, but obviously they're devolved governments, and people make their own choices. But yeah, that I think is the difference as we go across the different countries. And I've not, when you go to say into France or across to Denmark, I don't think Denmark have got much in the way of. I think Denmark are very similar actually in our situation, and they are experiencing hot summers, but their buildings are designed for cold winters. When you go into France and Spain, the architecture's different, and people have shutters and things, and that's quite normal. Whereas it's very rare to see a shutter or any kind of solar shading device in the UK at the moment, except for some of the the bespoke developments that such as the Reef Group work on. So I think I think there are changes as you go across the country, and I'd like to see more change in these parts of the world, to be honest.
Yeah, it's obviously location has a different impact and effects on the issue. Susie, what would you change for the better?
Oh, if only I was in charge. I think, well, given where we are now, I think I'm with Sam for the most part. I think I would really like to see developers and designers gain better instincts for how to design effectively for more passive solutions. I think a lot of the more energy intensive, more involved solutions are triggered because the architecture in the first place could have been more thought about in terms of overheating risk. And I think at the moment we're going through quite a painful phase where designers that used to comply a year or so ago are now having to be redesigned and thought about, or they're trying to be pushed through, despite the fact that actually they really need rethinking, and some of the windows need redesigning and maybe some more shading. And there are simple ways to improve designs, and we need to evolve them. And that will help all of us. I think we'll have nicer homes to live in as a result of thinking a bit more closely about overheating risk, particularly in the higher risk areas. I think the more we can develop that, the better. I think we also need to accept, a few things have come up today. I think there are some sites that, particularly in city centres where noise and air quality is so poor, that we may need to think about the fact that they're not appropriate for homes at the moment. And unless we can improve the air quality and improve the noise levels to the point where we can open the windows and we can live in them as a home, and as we might, with choices about how we operate the space that we live in all the time. I think offices are different, we're only there for a few hours a day and a few days of the week, but homes are much more personal, and I think planning has a responsibility to not necessarily give permission for homes in sites that are really going to require such horrible interventions in order to make them habitable, are they really truly habitable? So I think on balance, I think ADO is a good thing, but I wish it was better. I think this came out last time. I wish it was simpler to understand. I think the Welsh regulations are actually excellent, but what Wales has geographically a lower overheating risk than a lot of parts of England. So that may be why they allowed more simplistic methods.
That suitability, that suitability point. Sorry, go on, James.
Well, you say that, Susie, but from an overheating risk perspective, I think you're right. But from an environmental factors perspective, it is less prescriptive, so it leaves a huge variation in the approach between authorities and between environment health officers, for example. There's a big onus on the environment health officer influencing the noise requirements for your building regulation compliance, which will lead to variable results. And so one of the things that we're working on in our industry, we've in the acoustics industry, we've released guidance for England, and actually we've moved on to forming a committee to clarify what we think is appropriate for the Welsh guidance, because it leaves so much open to interpretation depending on the opinions of the Environment Health Officer. So there are less prescriptive approaches, and it's in fact it could lead to more complexity, Susie, in some situations. And I would prefer to see a level playing field, a clear, like Susie said, a clear and simple approach that is easy to replicate everywhere, really.
Yeah, that suitability question is quite an interesting one, and maybe the subject of a session on it in its own right. But having the 10-minute cities, 15-minute cities, you know, with a certain concentration of individuals wanting to be in a certain location, can only go upwards or downwards rather than spreading out. But Richard, any innovations coming through, technologies wise, products wise?
Yeah, there's always innovations coming through. I think even if you look at the fans that we've been talking about, I'm always amazed at the technical teams that we have around us. It seems every generation of product that they develop, the performance gets better, the pressure development increases, and the energy consumption goes down, and the noise levels improve. And I every time they deliver something, I think, no, they can't get any better than that. And then 3 or 4 years pass, and they do it again, and the teams behind that are delivering quieter, better performing, more energy efficient fans that are going into new build properties, and quieter ones as well, which is really important to deliver on the ventilation rates. And I think, you know, and that does help in overheating in some way, because you can run the fans at a higher speed, you know, with less noise, and particularly if you put larger fans in. So, you know, we're encouraging people to go to 125 fans, for example, when they're going to DMEV, because actually you can, you know, that you can get much more airflow through that at the same level of noise, you know, and that makes life a little bit more comfortable. However, it's not the overarching solution, as we discussed earlier on. Other innovations, we're looking at all kinds of technologies. We're looking at DX style modules that go onto the top of our heat recovery units. Others have got those in the market already. You know, we're looking at exhaust air heat pumps, which are quite interesting, really useful for the water load, and actually they provide cooling if you use it properly. And actually, how do you interface that with the heat recovery system? So in the winter, you can utilize the waste product effectively from the exhaust air heat pump. So, you know, we're looking at innovative ways of how we can interface with those kind of products as well. And, you know, we offer fan coils from within our business as well. And I think, you know, dependent on the type of property that you've got, if you're high-rise residential with a water loop system that's going around it, then actually fan coils are a reasonably good addition to the system as well. And if you can tie them in with a heat recovery unit, you know, or, you know, shoebox style heat pumps, to give a brand name to one of our heat pump suppliers in the marketplace, you know, you can provide some cooling in there and transport the waste heat back into the heating loop and the hot water. So there's lots of innovations that are coming on and in and around the kind of the active DX products. But I think we've kind of discussed on this call that I think everybody's running to that, and to Sam quite clearly pointed out, you know, the affordability of them. Can people afford to run them? Are they effective? Do they deliver the results that are needed? Maybe not. And I think, you know, one of the things that we're looking at, you know, seriously within our product portfolios is actually, it's not really an innovation, and the product groups have been around for a long time, but actually, and some of the comments have mentioned it as well, it's not necessarily about the temperature, it's about the comfort inside that particular room. And actually, you know, ceiling sweep fans are, you know, an invention that has been around for a long time. They're used in very hot and warm climates to provide a level of comfort that you would get from air movement across you, rather than just sitting in stagnant you know, static air volumes. And I think, you know, they're energy efficient, easy to use, easy to apply. People get them. You know, they do come with noise penalties, but absolutely, if you're hot, you know, you turn them on and you're cool. You know, what do you want? Do you want to, you know, want to be uncomfortable with, you know, the noise, you can put earplugs in, or do you want to be uncomfortable being really hot? Well, actually, you know, if you put some ceiling fans in, then actually you can use them when you need to. And I was very dubious, you know, I was very dubious about it until I spent 3 weeks in Australia at my cousin-in-law's house in the middle of their Brisbane summer. And I don't think I would have managed it unless they had ceiling fans installed in the bedroom. And I came back a bit of a convert. And actually, I think it's not necessarily the most technological advanced solutions that we actually need. And I think it's the solutions that, you know, a bit of solar shading, a bit more thought that goes into the building, you know, a bit more ventilation rates that we can use at certain times, with good summer bypasses and heat recovery units, and using active cooling and things, when you're passive cooling from that system, and also the application of ceiling sweep fans, I think are, you know, are the right measures. You know, we as a business, we're in air movement and air quality. We provide healthier indoor environments for people, you know, and you know, I think that there's some really nice products out there. Whether or not the regulations allow that to happen or not, and how do we make that happen moving forward for the Future Home Standard, I think is something that we need to really think about as an industry. The ceiling sweep fans also have very, very good energy efficiency. They consume very little power, and they provide quite a lot of comfort as well. So and they're not all wooden horrible things that were around on the ceiling. You can get some very stylish ceiling sweep fans that can provide a nice aesthetic into the property as well. So
noisy.
Sorry,
noisy. I don't think they're all noisy either, depending on how you run it. So I'm a big fan, and actually you can model it. You can actually comply with the regulation by using them. You know, it's
you don't get a huge benefit. I don't think you get as much benefit as the models as you do in real life, but yeah, you can get some benefit from putting them in, which is helpful to incentivize them. I totally agree. They're on my wish list as well, along with shading, external shading, and creating more efficient, elegant ways to build those into windows somehow. And particularly my wish list is elegant security grills that people don't feel look like prison bars, but enable you to open ground floor bedroom windows without worrying about burglars coming in.
Almost like a solar shading system.
Well, I mean, the continent seems to manage this stuff. I've got reams of pictures of these sort of, you know, wrought iron kind of fancy things, but there's all sorts of, I think the market is ready to come up with what the solutions are, and I think we'll start to see them in the next couple of years, and people will move away from thinking that they look like prison bars to thinking, oh, this is fantastic, I can open my windows on the ground floor without worrying, and be really like, yeah, it's a
I do have
really cool.
There is a product, Susie, that I've found, which is an external Venetian blind, which has also got security performance, which is really useful. Yeah, so you can operate it, you know, automated or manual, but with a motor to come down when needed. But it's yeah.
I'm mindful of time and also the battery on my laptop, unfortunately. So there's a raft of more questions and comments and other bits and pieces. So I'm pleased we've got another session in the offing in June. So hopefully some of this will carry over and more discussions then. But yeah, just mindful of time and people's evenings. Any closing statements, any closing thoughts from anybody?
Can we, well, have we got any questions can we open the floor for questions? Have we got time, Richard?
So that we have, so Sam has spoken about quite a few of the comments that are in the chat. So talking about sorting the problem out at source rather than dealing with the problem when it is a problem. So there's been some discussions which I think we've covered about acoustic vents being a potential solution, but they've got limited performances. Stop talking about overheating and talk about comfort levels, and everybody's comfort levels are different, and some people will be too hot and too cold, and humidity levels is another part to maybe talk about. Quite a lot of agreement with the panel and comments with regards to 100mm openings being the answer, but not really being the answer. And then a question really whether you'd rather live in a flat or a 19 where was that comment?
I think Adam's. I've had a chat with Adam about this before, and his perspective is that when buildings were a bit leakier, they performed well in the summer, better in the summer. And the fact that we're designing more airtight buildings and blocking out the external environment more is a detriment to the indoor environment for the person. That I think that's his point of view. There's
some truth in that, but there's also some truth in the opposite point of view in the winter when it was really cold a couple of weeks ago. This house, drafty old house, really cold, and I would have given anything to swap for a nice passive house, please. So yeah, pros and cons. But I think on the whole, airtight is good, provided you've got generous window openings that you can then open up in a controlled way when you want to in the summer. That's generally perceived to be the best solution.
Excellent. Well, certainly some further discussion and consideration and experience in the offing there. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining us this evening, and thank Richard, Susie, Sam and James for their really insightful contributions for this evening. So thank you all very much, and I wish you well for the rest of the evening, and I look forward to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Okay.